Pam Bondi stepped into court determined to expose a powerful judge caught in a dangerous web of corruption. But what happens when the pursuit of justice means taking down a man once revered as a hero? Have you ever wondered what it takes to stand against power, even when it costs you everything? Stay tuned, because this is a story you won't soon forget. The courtroom was silent, almost unbearably so. The rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall echoed gently, each second amplifying the tension in the air. Something significant was clearly about to unfold. The courtroom doors swung open quietly, and Pam Bondi stepped in confidently, her gaze sharp and focused. There was no hesitation in her movements, only determination. Pam Bondi was no stranger to complex, high-stakes cases, renowned in legal circles for her relentless pursuit of truth and justice. Seated on the bench was Judge Marcus Caldwell, an African-American judge who had long been a revered figure in the community, known for his unwavering fairness, and integrity. Yet today something was off. His usual composure seemed strained, replaced by an unusual coolness and deliberate avoidance of eye contact. Directly opposite Pam sat Charles Lawson, a powerful and wealthy real estate developer. Lawson appeared outwardly calm, projecting an image of confidence. Yet beneath that facade, his unease was obvious. He kept adjusting his tie nervously, his eyes darting around the courtroom as if desperately searching for some unseen escape. As Pam organized her papers and glanced upward, she briefly caught Judge Caldwell's eyes. He immediately looked away, pretending to busy himself with the paperwork in front of him. This seemingly minor gesture struck Pam deeply. Something was definitely wrong here. What could make a respected judge avoid her gaze from the very start? Pam tightened her grip on her pen slightly, her intuition whispering a clear warning. This would be no ordinary courtroom battle. Judge Caldwell cleared his throat gently, breaking the tense silence. His voice was calm, even pleasant, but it carried a subtle, biting undertone. Ms. Bondi, I trust you have prepared thoroughly for today's proceedings. I wouldn't want to waste the court's valuable time, he remarked smoothly, a faint smirk flickering at the corner of his mouth. Pam felt the weight of his words, clearly intended to unsettle her. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to let him see any hint of discomfort. Her pulse quickened slightly, but outwardly she remained composed. Absolutely, Your Honor. You can expect nothing less from me, she responded firmly, her voice clear and unwavering. Caldwell leaned back in his chair with exaggerated ease, his demeanor radiating arrogance. He studied Pam carefully, as if assessing a weak point he could exploit. Good, he drawled, his eyes narrowed slightly. Because I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself in front of the court. Pam felt a brief surge of frustration rise within her chest, but quickly subdued it, reminding herself of her mission. She breathed calmly, anchoring her resolve in the strength of her purpose. Caldwell's intimidation tactics wouldn't deter her from seeking justice. Across from her, Charles Lawson continued to shift uncomfortably. His anxious gaze frequently flicked toward Caldwell, as if silently pleading for reassurance or direction. Beside him, Lawson's defense attorney began to show visible discomfort as well, glancing nervously at the judge with increasing concern. Pam couldn't help but wonder what hidden ties connected these three men, and why was Caldwell trying so hard to undermine her confidence? As she prepared to present her opening statement, Pam steeled herself. She knew this was only the beginning of a challenging and potentially dangerous journey. But what exactly were they hiding, and how far would they go to keep their secrets safe? Gathering her resolve, Pam stood and addressed the courtroom clearly. Your Honor, I would like to present the first piece of evidence. Official financial documents detailing unauthorized allocations of public funds. She handed copies to Caldwell and Lawson's attorney, noticing Caldwell's slight hesitation as he took the documents. Pam continued confidently, projecting key pages onto the courtroom screen. If you'll note, these documents show significant financial discrepancies, and notably, a signature that should not appear here. Pam paused dramatically, allowing the gravity of her next words to resonate through the courtroom. This signature belongs to you, Judge Caldwell. Caldwell's composed demeanor shattered momentarily. His eyes widened, and a flash of panic crossed his face before he could suppress it. He quickly regained control, his voice sharp and defensive. This is absurd, Miss Bondi. These accusations are unfounded, and this so-called evidence is entirely inappropriate. But Pam had seen the brief moment of vulnerability clearly, and so had everyone else in the courtroom. Caldwell's mask had slipped, if only for an instant. She knew now, more than ever, that she was facing an opponent willing to do whatever it took to hide the truth. Pam's heart raced as she considered her next move. Caldwell's reaction confirmed her suspicions, but what exactly was he so desperate to hide? And would uncovering it cost her more than she was prepared to pay? Later that evening, Pam sat alone in her office, reviewing her notes when she noticed an unmarked envelope lying on top of her documents. Curious and cautious, she opened it carefully. Inside was a single, typed sheet of paper, revealing shocking details. The anonymous sender explained how Caldwell was being manipulated by a powerful, shadowy organization. They were holding leverage over him, a secret that involved Caldwell's family. The note also mentioned Caldwell's cherished pocket watch, a gift from his late father, symbolizing the very ideals of justice and integrity Caldwell had long upheld. Pam remembered seeing Caldwell hold it occasionally in court, almost as if seeking reassurance. As Pam processed this revelation, she felt a deep, conflicting wave of sympathy. Caldwell was not just a corrupt official. He was also a man trapped by circumstances. How far would he go to protect his family, and could Pam expose the truth without losing her own sense of justice in the process? Pam paced her office, heart heavy with indecision. On one side was the respected image of a judge who had once embodied justice. On the other, the stark reality of corruption that demanded accountability. She grappled internally, weighing compassion against her duty to uphold the truth. But as the night deepened, clarity slowly emerged. Justice, she reminded herself, was not selective. Protecting Caldwell's reputation would mean betraying everything she stood for. Resolving firmly, Pam knew her path forward. She would stand unequivocally on the side of truth, whatever the personal cost. Yet she couldn't shake one lingering question. Would this decision unravel deeper dangers she hadn't even begun to imagine? Pam exhaled slowly, steadying herself before taking the final step. The courtroom was silent, so silent that the ticking of the clock overhead felt deafening. Every eye was on her, waiting for what she would reveal next. She picked up a document and held it up, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. "Your Honor," she said, her voice measured, firm. "This document shows a clear paper trail of unauthorized fund transfers, millions of taxpayer dollars rerouted into private accounts. And at the bottom of this page," Pam turned and clicked a button on her presentation remote. A projection of the document appeared on the large screen at the front of the courtroom. "This is the signature of the official who approved these transactions." She let the silence stretch just long enough. Then she spoke the words that shattered the air like glass. "Judge Marcus Caldwell." The room exploded into whispers. A few jurors leaned forward, eyes widening. One of them, a middle-aged woman in a navy blazer, shook her head in disbelief. The stenographer paused momentarily before resuming her furious typing. Caldwell stiffened. For the first time since the trial began, his mask cracked. It was subtle, a flicker in his expression, a slight tensing of his jaw. But Pam saw it. Everyone saw it. Still, the judge quickly recovered, his voice sharp as he leaned forward. "This is outrageous, Miss Bondi," he snapped. "This so-called evidence is inadmissible, a clerical mistake at best, a desperate attempt to mislead the court at worst." Pam remained unshaken. She'd expected resistance. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "the evidence speaks for itself. And there's more. To further substantiate this claim, I have an audio recording that directly links these financial discrepancies to an off-the-record conversation involving this very case." She turned to her assistant, who was seated behind her. "Play the recording." Her assistant reached for the laptop, clicked on the file. Nothing. A hollow silence filled the room. Pam frowned. "Try it again." Her assistant's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, but the look on her face made Pam's stomach twist. "It's not here," the assistant whispered. "It was just here. The file is gone." The murmur in the courtroom grew louder. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances. A few spectators whispered in hushed, urgent tones. Even the bailiff, who had remained motionless the entire trial, shifted slightly. Pam felt a cold wave of realization. The recording, her strongest piece of evidence, had vanished. She swallowed hard, her mind working rapidly. There had been no opportunity for her team to delete it. That meant her gaze snapped up, and that's when she saw it. Judge Caldwell. Sitting there, hands folded neatly on the bench, his expression unreadable. But there was something different, a flicker of something in his eyes. Not anger, not even fear. Relief. Pam's pulse pounded. Had he expected this? Had he planned this? For the first time in this entire case, Pam Bondi felt like she had walked straight into a trap. She turned back to the judge. "Your Honor," she said slowly, keeping her voice firm. This recording was securely stored. Its sudden disappearance raises serious concerns about obstruction of justice. Caldwell merely tilted his head. "Ms. Bondi, you are making dangerous accusations without proof. I suggest you proceed carefully." Pam clenched her jaw, scanning the faces around her. Lawson's attorney was still seated, his hands folded tightly together, his face pale. Charles Lawson himself was gripping the table so hard his knuckles had turned white. Everyone was feeling the shift. The balance of power had just changed, and for the first time Pam wasn't sure who was in control. She inhaled, steadied herself. She wasn't finished. Not yet. But one question burned in her mind. Who had erased that recording? And how far were they willing to go to bury the truth? Pam stood motionless, her mind racing, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. The missing recording had thrown a wrench into everything she had meticulously built. She had expected resistance, even hostility, but outright evidence tampering? That was a new level of obstruction. The silence in the courtroom was thick, suffocating. Then suddenly, scrape. The sound of a chair being pushed back echoed through the room. It came from the defense table, heads turned sharply. Pam's eyes locked onto Charles Lawson's attorney, who was now rising to his feet. His movements were slow, deliberate. A hush fell over the room as the man straightened his suit, then exhaled deeply. "Your Honor," his voice rang out, steadier than Pam expected. "I can no longer, in good conscience, remain silent. I have a duplicate copy of the missing recording." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Pam felt the surge of adrenaline, shock, relief, but also a sharp curiosity. Why now? What had changed? Across the room, Lawson twisted violently in his seat, his face draining of all color. His lips parted but no words came out. Instead, his breathing grew shallow, almost panicked. Pam watched as his fingers gripped the edge of the table so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He turned toward his attorney, eyes wide with disbelief, as if the man had just plunged a knife into his back. "Don't do this," Lawson hissed under his breath. "You have no idea what you're getting into." The attorney hesitated, just for a second. Then he squared his shoulders. "The truth has to come out," he said firmly. Pam stole a glance at Judge Caldwell. The man had gone deathly still. No retort, no dismissive smirk, only silence. She saw it then, a flicker in his eyes, something close to fear. It was brief, but undeniable. "He knows this is over." A tense beat passed. Then, the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open. Two uniformed officers strode inside. Their movements were brisk, their presence an unspoken declaration. Pam barely breathed. The lead officer took a step forward, eyes fixed on the bench. His voice was steady, official, but it cut through the thick air like a blade. "Judge Marcus Caldwell, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and abuse of judicial power." Gasps erupted from the spectators. Reporters scrambled for their notebooks. A murmur of disbelief swept through the jury box. Pam kept her gaze on Caldwell. The judge, once an untouchable pillar of the legal system, sat frozen in his chair. His fingers curled slightly, pressing into the armrest, but his expression betrayed him. His breath was uneven. His composed facade was crumbling before their eyes. "This is outrageous," Caldwell finally spoke, his voice weaker than before. "You have no authority to." The officer cut him off. "You have the right to remain silent." A click echoed through the chamber as the cold steel of handcuffs locked around Caldwell's wrists. Pam watched, unmoving. She had fought for this moment. She had pushed through every roadblock, every intimidation tactic, every attempt to bury the truth. And yet, as Caldwell was pulled to his feet, she saw it. The flicker of something almost human in his eyes. Regret? Or was it something else? Her gaze dropped for just a moment, to the wooden bench where Caldwell had been sitting. There, lying abandoned, was the pocket watch. Pam felt something shift in her chest. The same watch his father had given him, the same watch he had clung to as if it could anchor him in a storm. Now it was just an object left behind. Pam inhaled deeply, straightened her shoulders and stepped forward. The truth had finally come to light. But was this the end? Or just the beginning of something even bigger? Pam stepped into the dimly lit holding area of the county jail, her heels clicking softly against the concrete floor. The cold air smelled of metal and disinfectant, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the courtroom where she last saw Judge Marcus Caldwell. Now, there was no power in his presence, no authority in his voice. Through the reinforced glass, he sat hunched over, his hands clasped together on the table. His orange jumpsuit was a harsh reminder of how far he had fallen. The once imposing judge who had ruled from the bench now looked like just another prisoner, tired, smaller, as if the weight of his own decisions had physically diminished him. Pam hesitated for just a second, then picked up the phone receiver. Caldwell glanced up, expression unreadable, before slowly doing the same. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice rough, almost hollow. Pam met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I needed to hear it from you." A bitter chuckle escaped him. "And what exactly do you want to hear, Miss Bondi? A confession? An apology?" She didn't blink. "The truth." Caldwell exhaled, leaning back. For a long moment he said nothing, staring past her like he was watching something distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, worn. "Do you know why I became a judge?" Pam waited. "My father," he continued, "first black attorney in our district, a man of integrity. He believed in justice, in the law being the great equalizer. He gave me his watch the day I was sworn in, told me to hold on to it whenever I doubted myself." His fingers twitched as if reaching for something, then stilled. The watch was gone. A shadow passed over his face. "For years, I did." Pam leaned forward slightly. "Then why did you stop?" Caldwell let out a slow, bitter breath. "Because I thought I was in control. I believed if I bent the rules just a little, I could keep my position, protect my family. But power isn't something you control, Miss Bondi. It's something that controls you. And like every addict, I kept telling myself I could stop." His jaw tightened, until I couldn't. Silence. Heavy and suffocating. Pam watched him carefully. His confession wasn't an excuse. It was an admission. Not of corruption, but of weakness. Finally, Caldwell looked at her again. "I thought I was protecting my family," he murmured. "But in the end, I lost everything. Everything my father ever believed in." Pam absorbed his words. This was not a man who feared prison. He feared something worse, dying a traitor to his own values. For a brief moment, she felt something unexpected. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, understanding. But the law didn't work on feelings. She straightened. "I appreciate your honesty, Judge Caldwell, but justice still has to be served." Caldwell nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "I know." Pam stood to leave, but just as she turned, his voice stopped her. "Do you believe in redemption, Ms. Bondi?" She hesitated. "I believe in consequences," she said finally. "What you do with them, that's up to you." Without another word, she stepped away, the heavy door clanking shut behind her. As she walked down the long, sterile corridor, his last words echoed in her mind. Was redemption truly possible? Or were some lines too deep to be erased? Pam stepped out of the county jail, the cold evening air hitting her skin like a quiet reminder of reality. She had expected to feel relief, perhaps even satisfaction, after confronting Judge Caldwell. Instead, there was only a heavy weight settling in her chest, a realization she couldn't ignore. Caldwell had fallen, but he was just one piece of the puzzle. The corruption didn't start with him, and it wouldn't end with him. She walked toward her car, but instead of getting in, she stood for a moment, staring at the city's skyline in the distance. A city that believed in its justice system, a system that had cracks deeper than anyone wanted to admit. Caldwell had been a judge, a man who had once believed in fairness, in integrity. If someone like him had been manipulated, how many others were part of this? How many more names were still hidden in the shadows? Pam inhaled sharply, her decision solidifying. This wasn't over. She had exposed one man, but the truth was bigger than one person, bigger than one case. Caldwell had been right about one thing. Power was an addiction, and the people truly pulling the strings, they were still out there. Pam glanced back at the towering courthouse in the distance. She had spent years inside that building, fighting for justice, believing in the system. But today, she understood something deeper. Justice wasn't something you waited for. It was something you chased, something you fought for, no matter how uncomfortable the truth became. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she landed on the number she needed. She hesitated only for a second before pressing dial. The call connected. "It's me," Pam said, her voice steady. "We're not done. Caldwell was just the beginning. I need everything we have on who is really behind this." A pause. Then the voice on the other end responded. "You sure you want to go down this road, Bondi?" Pam's grip tightened around her phone. She had never been more sure of anything in her life. No one can outrun the truth. She ended the call, took one last glance at the jail behind her, then got into her car. As she pulled away, the headlights cut through the darkness ahead. She wasn't running from the truth. She was heading straight for it. Pam stood at the podium, the weight of the moment pressing against her shoulders. The courthouse steps beneath her feet had seen decades of legal battles, thousands of verdicts. Today, they would witness something more, a commitment to justice that went beyond a single case. Before her, a crowd had gathered. Reporters, cameras, citizens, people who had followed the case from the beginning, waiting to hear the truth from the woman who had taken on one of the most powerful men in the system and won. She let the silence linger for a moment, steadying herself before speaking. "Justice is not a privilege," she began, her voice carrying through the crisp afternoon air. "It is a right, and that right belongs to every citizen, no matter their wealth, no matter their power, no matter their past." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others stood frozen, absorbing her words. "The case against Judge Caldwell was never about revenge," Pam continued, her tone unwavering. "It was about truth. It was about accountability. And most importantly, it was about trust. Because without trust in our legal system, we have nothing." She took a breath, scanning the faces before her. Some carried relief, others skepticism. "I won't stand here and tell you that corruption has been erased overnight," she admitted. "We have more work to do, and we will do it, because justice does not belong to the powerful, it belongs to the people." She leaned forward slightly, letting her next words land with the weight they deserved. "Justice does not discriminate. It does not bow to influence. It does not forget. Justice holds us all accountable, no matter our status, our title, or our past." A beat of silence. Then, applause. It started small, hesitant. Then it grew, a rising wave of voices, hands clapping in unison, not just for Pam, but for what her words represented. Pam exhaled slowly, her grip easing on the podium. This was not the end of a battle. It was the beginning of a war. As the applause faded and the crowd slowly dispersed, Pam stepped away from the podium. The weight of the case had been immense, but deep inside, she knew the fight was far from over. She had exposed one man, but corruption didn't exist in isolation. Power never worked alone. She barely had time to process the moment when an officer approached her, holding a small, unmarked envelope. "This was left for you, ma'am," he said, his expression unreadable. Pam took it, a strange unease settling in her chest. It was identical to the one she had received before, when she first learned about Caldwell's ties to something bigger. She turned the envelope over. No return address, no name, just her own. With deliberate precision, she tore it open and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Her eyes scanned the words, and instantly, her pulse quickened. "Caldwell was never the real problem, just another pawn. You were meant to find him, but will you go further, or will you stop where they want you to?" Pam inhaled sharply, reading it again. Whoever had sent this letter knew more, much more. A gust of wind whipped through the courthouse steps, rustling the paper in her hands. She folded it carefully, slipping it into her coat pocket. Then, with renewed determination, she walked toward her car. Her mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. "What do you think? This case might be closed, but Pam Bondi's fight for justice is far from over." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Your support means everything. It's what keeps us bringing powerful stories like this to life. Every like, share, and comment fuels our passion to uncover more gripping tales of truth and justice. So what do you think happens next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going.